Hey, my name is Dan Becker, and I've been doing these chemical prevention presentations, since 1989. I've probably done, I don't know, maybe 1,500, 2,000 of them. And so this is one of the very few videotapes that I've done. I've had a problem with doing videotapes because one time you do a videotape, it can be outdated very quickly. But I don't have much time left as far as how much time I'm going to live. I have a brain tumor, and I'm not going to be alive in a few months from now, and so the time would be now to make a video. And so I'm going to start out with a memory exercise. This is about how how chemicals affect your brain. And so I'm going to start out with a memory exercise. I'm going to ask you 8 questions. You don't have to remember the answer to the question. Just remember the question and remember them in the order that I asked. Here we go. What door did you come in to get to this building? Did you stop somewhere on your way to the building? What time did you leave your place? Did you have something to eat at your place before you left? What time did you wake up? Were you able to sleep all night, or did you toss and turn? What time did you go to bed? And my last question, what did you eat last night before you went to bed? And so now I'm going to ask you to repeat those. And so if you want to pause the video and do that, that's fine. But otherwise, you repeat them and see if you can get it. Now, if you pause it, that's all right. When you come back now, I ask people and we go through each and every one until we get to it. Now, the point of what happened in your brain right here is this board was designed to help me stay on track, but it might be helpful to you as well. And so there's little circles over here. And this presentation was geared towards 7th and 8th graders at an ALC school. And so we're using language that would be appropriate for 7th and 8th graders, not language that's appropriate for medical school, but for 7th and 8th graders. And so these are memory cells over here. And to a 7th and 8th grader, we separated your memory out into 2 parts. We have your mechanical memory, which is how do you open a door, how do you sit in a chair, how do you sharpen a pencil, your heart rate. Things are mechanical, you don't really think about them, they just happen. And then over here you have your emotional and your sensory, which is your touch, smell, taste, sound. And so doctors use the word binding. Like a 3-ring binder to a 7th grader, those little grooves on the binder snap together, and that's how they work. If they don't snap together, they don't work. They have to snap together, and so doctors call that binding. Well, these cells, brain memory cells, snap together and bind really well, and then these snap together and bind really well. It's when people go from one to the other that everybody has memory problems. It doesn't matter who you are. I've done that memory test for almost 30 years, sometimes for a gymnasium full of 300 students, so probably 25, 30,000 kids over those years, and nobody's gotten that test right on the first shot because it's designed to make you fail. It's designed to make you fail. We're saying what time did you, but then did you toss and turn? But what time did you go to bed? Or what door did you come in? But then what did you eat last night? And so those memory cells, your brain's not rigged in order to be able to pass something. Now, if I gave you a couple seconds to work through the mechanical or whatever part of your brain you work through, you could probably retrace it all and get them all right because the memory's there. It's in your brain. It just takes a little bit to pull it up and get it out. And I'll give you another example of how that works. Let's say you go to a really big giant mall and it's a huge parking lot, and as you're going in, you're thinking, or it's a ramp, and you're going in, you're thinking about what you're going to buy, how much money you have, maybe the radio, cell phone went off, you're talking to people about credit cards and so forth. You go into the mall, you came out, you forgot where you parked the car. And that car is worth a heck of a lot of money, but you forgot where you parked it. And so the reason why you did is because you were emotional, you did a mechanical thing. A lot of times people are on a job site and they misplace a hammer or a tool or something. It's because they're emotional. Now, if you retrace your steps, you can go back and find it. But the idea that you misplaced it is because usually you were in the opposite. You were in the emotional side here when you were doing a mechanical thing, like putting it down. And so now that we talked about that, we're going to talk about drugs and alcohol, which is why we're out here. And that we're going to go back on that memory cells. In this state where we're at now, we're in Minnesota, we legalized marijuana in July 1st of 2015. And at the time, we only legalized 2 substances. We legalized THC and CBD. Well, THC stands for tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD stands for cannabidiol or cannabidiol. And there's so many things we don't know about marijuana that this video would seem outdated and uneducated because we keep learning more and more as we go. But the one thing we know about THC, to a 7th grader, we call it glue. And the reason why we call it glue is because you're still going to be positive for THC a few days, 1 week, 3 weeks. If it's natural THC, not the synthetic stuff that's made in labs, but the natural THC, that's glue. And that's going to stick on your cells. So on your memory cells, you've got glue on there. So under a microscope, they're going whop, 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 whop. There's glue on there, which would also be considered a blocker because it's blocking. So information's having trouble getting in and out because there's glue on there. So people who do a lot of this weed, the natural stuff, whether you do it in an edible or whether you smoke it or vaporize it, however you get it in, it's sticky and it's on there on those cells. And so they're doing things like, oh, where's my keys? Where's my wallet? Where's my pencil? Where's my lighter? Where's my backpack? Where's my whatever you're looking for? Because you're misplacing things because you got glue glue on those short-term memory cells, which you can see why you would call it a blocker. It's very visual. It just blocks. And it's not an exact science. It might block a little bit here and a little bit there, so some information is getting in and out, but you've got glue on there, which is one of the reasons why doctors don't like to prescribe it, at least at this point in our time right now. There's another substance that's similar to that, that is alcohol, and that is also sticky. It's nowhere near as sticky as THC and marijuana, but the alcohol that we test for right now at this point in time is called THIQ. Now you can get a blood test, a breath test, a urine test. I'm going to show a little breathalyzer right here that you can get. Anyway, it's a very small little breathalyzer, and when you blow into that, that's just so you can walk drunk, act drunk, look drunk, but if you don't have this THIQ in your system, you're going to blow zeros. It's going to look like zero because that's the one that we're testing for. Now, there's all kinds of synthetic things that will do the same in the brain as what alcohol would do, but for right now, this is how we're testing alcohol. And so I knew a lady who got drunk on a Sunday afternoon, and she got a DUI on her way into work on Monday, and everyone was surprised. She was like, wait a minute, I went to sleep all night, I got up, I had a cup of coffee, how could I be above a 0.08, which is what it is right now at this point in time, and she said, I don't know how it's possible. Now, if it was marijuana, that would have been, several days. We don't have right now, we don't have a way of testing that to see how high a person is. Based on that, we just don't know. So you could get a DUI in quite a few states for being high on it. Well, anyway, so that's one thing that might change. Now that we talked about that and you understand how the memory works and these chemicals and the sticky part of it, we're going to move on and talk about neurotransmitters. Neuro meaning nerve transmitting information. If I hit my hand on this table, a message goes in my brain and goes back to say that hurt, don't do that. There's over 200 that scientists have identified in our bodies and in our brains. We're not going to talk about 200. I don't know about all those. We're only going to talk about 4. We're going to talk about uppers and downers. So for the purpose of this video, enkephalins or enkephalins and endorphins are uppers, serotonin and GABA is downers. Drugs and alcohol mimic these neurotransmitters. That's why we do drugs and alcohol. Now there's going to be a whole lot of other neurotransmitters that drugs are affecting, especially the synthetic stuff, because kids are getting buzzes off of buzzes you didn't even know you get a buzz off of. But for the purpose of this, we're going to just focus on 4 because that's enough, all right? So enkephalins and endorphins, you got crack, meth, cocaine, Adderall, Ritalin, all this caffeine. These are all stimulants. These are uppers. Serotonin, Seroquel, GABA, gabapentin, Neurontin, Trazodone, Valium, all your barbiturates. These are downers. You're driving a semi on the highway, you slam your foot on the brakes. THC and the marijuana that we have right now is a downer. It'll slow you down. I don't care if you want to tax it, legalize it, make all kinds of money on it, it's still a downer. Kid says, well, no, marijuana is a wonder drug. I said, why would you blurt that? We have kids screaming out stuff, and when I do these presentations all the time, they just blurt it out, which sometimes it's okay, but we just got to move with it. So then they said, well, why do you say marijuana is a wonder drug? He said, because you never heard anybody committing a violent crime on marijuana. I said, well, I have, but you could say that about most all the downers. I mean, have you heard anybody taking a bottle of Trazodone and going out and robbing a bank? No, that's why they call them downers. So it's not just marijuana, it's other ones. He said, well, it's a natural herb. It grows in the ground. I said, yeah, poison ivy, that's natural. Why don't you roll in that and smoke it? See how that does. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good for you. There's a lot of natural things will kill you. I said, okay. So we squared that away. I said, now, is there anybody in this room who could run a mile? So at this point in the video, somebody's going to raise their hand. They could run a mile. So you ask their name and you write it down. Say, well, let's say that your name is Robert. Okay, Robert or Roberto or whatever you want to be. Okay, so he starts running and he releases dopamine. That's why we call dope. Smoke some dope, man. Smoke some dopamine. I gotta go see the dope man. I'm looking for the dopamine man. Now, in some parts they use the word adrenaline, but adrenaline and dopamine, same thing. So he releases some dopamine, it goes back in and it recharges. Doctors use the word uptake or reuptake. It goes back in and recharges. It comes out, it goes back in and recharges. This would be a pace or part of metabolism. So it's going back in, it's recharging, it's going back in. So let's say he's running at 4 miles an hour. Now this is a gross exaggeration, but this is 7th grade level, all right? So it recharges, it goes back in, it uptake, reuptake, go back in, recharges. Let's say he's running at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 miles an hour. Let's say he's sitting in front of his computer all day eating chips and not doing anything. He's going to have real slow pace, metabolism, we're going to go real slow like that. Now let's say that he's used to running at 4 miles an hour. This is all hypothetical here. But he decides to increase his speed to something he didn't train for. What will happen is these cells will come out and give him the energy that he needs, but these didn't have time to go back in and recharge because he didn't train for that. So he's going to go, let me throw this in right here. Every single cell needs oxygen. At this point, every bone cell, tissue cell, blood cell, memory cell, they all lay dormant and flattened or endocrine and in different places. As soon as they pop out and the brain says, we need you, they pop out and they crave air. And an example of that would be, let's say you're at some building where the elevator's up. It's a tall building. You've got to get up to some floors. Could be a dormitory or a hotel or a hospital or somewhere. You got to get up there. So you start heading up these steps because the elevator's out. It's not working. And at some point you start going, well, what that tells me is that you have the cells in your body to get to where you want to go. They're just all craving air. Because if you had none of them, you just sit down and say, I can't go any further. I'm done. But because you keep going, that tells me that you have the cells. They just all need air. That's what they're trying to do. Now, what most athletes do is they kick it all out at the end of the race. They run to the finish line. They collapse on the ground. They're staring in the sky, puking and spitting. No, I'm going to die. Well, the race is over. It doesn't matter. If you do this in the middle of the race, you're going to lose. Most athletes do it at the end of the race. And they run to the finish line, and they collapse on the ground, and then that's it. That's what you do. So now that we understand that, we're going to pick on nicotine users, cigarette smokers, because at this point, when we were making this video, that's an enormous amount of people doing the vaporizing nicotine, a lot of nicotine users, so we're going to pick on them. Now in the future, you can pick on someone else, but right now we're going to pick on them. So what happened, I told them, you're all going to get a good buzz off that first one in the morning, and then you're not going to get much of a buzz off the rest of the day. I'm like, wait a minute, I do get a good buzz here and there, but that first one, how'd you know that? Well, in the morning, you release your regular amount, all right? You smoke an e-cigarette, regular cigarette, whatever. Here comes that nicotine, all right? It binds up to it, and that's the buzz. So I'm going to say this back and forth about 5 times so you never forget. In order to get a buzz, you got to bind. Because if you don't bind, you don't buzz. Buzzing and binding, binding and buzzing. In order to get a buzz, you got to bind, because if you don't bind, you're not going to get that buzz. So hopefully I said it in a way that you remember. Now when I do this presentation in health classes all around Minnesota, I've been to a lot of cities doing this in health classes. For some reason, the health teachers always pick this right here as the test question because they've narrowed it down to what is the most important thing of this whole presentation, and this is it right here. The question on the test is, what do the brains not like? And the multiple choice answer, the correct answer is buzz. Brains don't like buzz. Buzz is an abnormal state. Buzz could mean stroke, heart attack, seizures, and death. Brains don't like buzz. Brains don't like buzz. So as soon as you get this buzz right here, these cells under a microscope, they say, whoa, we got too much of something up there. We don't want a stroke or a heart attack or a seizure or death. We don't want to be in an abnormal state. So to a 7th grader now, we're bringing this down. Okay, these cells right here under a microscope, they start shutting down, right? They start shutting down. That's what they're going to look like right there, right? So now the natural stuff that you released in the morning, that can't uptake or reuptake because they're saying we're not doing that. We don't want a buzz. We don't want death. We don't want strokes. We don't want seizure. We don't want any of that stuff. So they're not going to go back in. They're going to uptake or reuptake. They're not going to recharge. Now they could be blockers, inhibitors, motivators, stimulators, a lot of things they can do. But at this point, they're not going back in to recharge. They're not going to uptake because the brain is saying no, we're not doing that. So let's just say it is an example. They float off and they're gone. All right, because your buzz lasted a really long time, or you've been doing it for very long, so it's gone. Now the chemical that you put in your brain, in this case it's the nicotine, right? That can't go back into a cell and recharge because it's not real. It's not real. I'm going to run through a whole list of chemicals that can uptake or reuptake in your brain. Crack, meth, heroin, pot, PCP, angel dust, Vicodin, Percocet, Monster, Rockstar, Red Bull, Coca-Cola, Mountain Dew, alcohol, cigarettes, none of it. I will show you right here. There's a Red Bull. Red Bull cannot go uptake into a cell, recharge, and come back out with more Red Bull. You don't get to duplicate Red Bull in your brain. Kid says, well, marijuana, that's natural. Marijuana's not going to go in here, recharge, and come back out as more marijuana. You don't get to duplicate marijuana in your brain. Now this drug could be a lot of things. It could be a blocker, inhibitor, motivator, stimulator. It can do a lot of things, but it cannot uptake, recharge, and come back out as more because it's not real. So in this case, you're going to lose it. Let's say it's gone. All right. Now, after 20 to 25 minutes, because you're a nicotine, that's what we're talking about, other drugs will be different. Crack and meth could be 2 to 4 hours. Marijuana could be 2 to 6, 8 hours. Opioids could be 4 to 10. I mean, they're all different. But we're talking about nicotine. That's 20 to 25 minutes. That's all that is. And so after 20, 25 minutes of having nothing, these cells right here under a microscope, they start squeezing and they're saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. They're like, where's all the food? What's going on? There's nothing up there. So they start squeezing, feed me, feed me, feed me. All right? That's a headache. That's a craving. That's a migraine. That's a withdrawal. Unless you got cancer or a tumor or something, like I told you, I got unless you got a cancer or a tumor, I got a tumor, that's what it is. Your headache is a group of neurotransmitters over here saying, feed me, over here, feed me. A massive migraine, feed me. That's what a headache is, right? It could be just you need more air. You might be having a headache because your cells need more oxygen. But in this case, if you're a cigarette smoker, what's the quickest way to get fed? They say, oh, smoke another cigarette would be the answer. That's what the answer is. So you smoke an e-cigarette, regular cigarette, doesn't matter. There's a nicotine. And the brain says, all right, we're good. Walks like, talks like, acts like, looks like. Now you didn't get a buzz because there was nothing binding there. You see how that works? There was maybe a little bit of binding, but not a whole lot. But in this case, we didn't put any binding there, so you're not going to get a buzz. But you won't get a headache either because they're saying it looks like it. They've mistaken it for what that same thing is. And so walks like, talks like, looks like. All right. So now after 20, 25 minutes, okay, these can't uptake or reuptake because they're not real. Because we're talking nicotine. That's 25 minutes. They're going to float out and be gone. Now again, they could be blockers, inhibitors, motivators, stimulators, they can be a lot of things, but they're not going back into recharge. So now that they're gone, after 20, 25 minutes, they say, feed me, you smoke another cigarette, you put that fake amount and they say, all right, we're good. After 20 to 25 minutes, they can't uptake or reuptake, so they're gonna float out and they'll probably be gone. After 20, 25 minutes, they say, feed me, see what's happening? That's addiction. You now understand addiction. That is addiction. You can put any drug in this category right here, and that is addiction. You now understand addiction. And if you don't, rewind this and watch it again so that you understand addiction, because that is addiction. There was kids sitting in one of the classrooms at this moment. He blurted out and he says, I'm a man. I said, okay, why did you just blurt out in the classroom, I'm a man? Kids blurt out stuff all the time when I do these presentations. They do, and maybe I'm at fault for encouraging it. I just let them say whatever they want, whenever they want. We just go with it. And the kid said, I said, why do you say you're a man? He says, because I drank a Monster energy drink last night. Didn't do nothing for me. I went right to sleep. Well, for the purpose of this video, at this point in time, this Monster right here is 5.5 cans of Pepsi in terms of caffeine. Now, that's going to change. I know it will. But at this point in time during this video, this is 5.5 cans of caffeine, Pepsi in terms of caffeine. And so before I could continue, the kid next to me said, I'm a double man. I said, why do you do the I'm a double man? He says, because I drank 2 Monster energy drinks last night, thank you very much. Didn't do nothing for me, I went right to sleep. I said, okay, guess what? You're not a man, you're not a double man, guess what? They're gone. They're gone. When we talk about killing brain cells, drugs killing brain cells, that's what we're talking about. The definition of tolerance to a 7th grader, all right? To a 7th grader wants to know, what is the definition of tolerance? That's the definition of tolerance. They're gone. That's the definition. If you've got nothing to bind up to it and you can't get a buzz, there's a show on television right now, and you'll probably be seeing reruns in the future. It's called Drugs Incorporated. And there was a guy on their most recent show. He was sitting in Seattle. They always cover their mouths and they disguise their voices, and then they've covered, so they're disguised. And the voice is deep and dark. And anyway, he says, I'm the biggest drug dealer in Seattle. I got $1 million. I control the entire city. I also got 98% pure drugs. I'm like, that's a comedy show. All right? Potency in drugs can kill you, and they kill a lot of people who have no history of potency with that drug. They don't. But for a regular drug user's potency, I'm sorry, but it's a joke. You said, well, how can that be a joke? No, it doesn't matter if you got 90% pure, 20% pure, 50% pure, 10% pure, 60% pure. If you don't have these cells right here, you're not going to get a buzz. You got to have these cells to get that buzz. So that could be potent of all potent. It could be 80, 90% pure as opposed to 20. And if you don't have these cells right here, you're not going to get that buzz. You got to have the cells to get the buzz. And they usually let the worst guy test those drugs. Now the old drugs like the cocaine and the other things, the natural drugs of the past, they always say, oh, there's a bitterness in there. That's obviously some Colombian cocaine, maybe from the Cali or whatever, cartels. But see, now with all the synthetic stuff, you can't do that. Because that's the reason why at this point in time in this video there's so many deaths related to synthetic drugs, because there is no way for the average dealer or person using it to test the potency of it without doing it. So they're doing it. That's how they find the potency. Now in the future there's going to be ways to test that potency, but right now they don't know. And if it's a person who's never done that kind of thing, they're going to overdose and die. All right? And so now that we talked about that, we are going to talk about potency. In order to talk about potency, we're going to talk about tar. In order to talk about tar, this is a picture of me. I got a brain tumor. I've had surgery, I've had radiation, and I've had this tumor, and I don't have but a few months left to live. And so now we're going to take a break, and this is part 1, and we're going to move on from here to part 2.